What's up, Liron here, and in this video I'm going to teach you 3 advanced watercolor techniques. These are techniques that have to do with more subtle and gentle control of the water and paint, and I developed these as a need to correct mistakes that I was doing, and then they became a staple of how I paint. And I think they're going to really help you, so let's get started. Okay, so we'll get started. This is going to be quite straightforward. So first is mixing on paper. I actually have a separate video on that, and how important it is to mix the paints on paper and not on the palette. So I'm going to zoom in, and what used to happen to me a lot in the past was I would over mix, and then my entire painting would end up looking gray, kind of like this mixture that you can see right here on my palette. And then I would get variations of this. So one part was this, one part was that, one part perhaps was a little warmer, but it was all very dull and boring. So what I came up with is mixing on the paper, meaning I'm gonna grab some blue paint, like so. And then if I want to add some yellow, I won't mix it all here. If I want to create a green, I'll just put the yellow next to it, besides it. And you see how that works? That it kind of breaks it into individual paints and colors, but it works so much better for me. And then I want to add a bit of that other blue here that I barely have any left, and I'm just adding it, okay? Same thing, for example, if you want to mix this kind of a gray purple. So I'd get some of the blue, and then I'd get some of the red, and this is not enough. I'm gonna grab more pure red that you can see. It's outside the frame, doesn't really matter. Here, let me show you. A bit of the pure red, and then I'll let them mix on paper. And what this does, it just leads to a more interesting impression. I also do that a lot with oranges and reds and yellows. So a bit of red, then a bit of yellow, and I let them mix on paper rather than mixing everything here and then ending up with something dull and boring. Okay, so this is something that's really important. I do it in every painting almost, and I find that breaking it down to the individual colors, at least on the first layer, is very beneficial. Then later on you can mix a bit more, but it's very hard to go back to vibrant paints, so I recommend using them in the first wash. And you can even layer them like that, so a bit of red and a bit of yellow on top of that, but you mix here, not on the palette. And later on, in later washes, you can do a bit of a more mixing on the palette itself, and then it's okay because you have a base layer that's actually vibrant and fun. So next technique is real-time value control, and there's a reason why I call it that, because with time you learn how to better control your values. So let me show you. Let's say I don't know exactly how dark or light I want something to be, so I just grab a bunch of paint, and then whoops, it's too light, I wanted it to be darker. So what I do is, I go back on top of that and darken it, okay? So here we go, I'm gonna darken it up, more and more. Now, I'm gonna darken it, whoops, too much. So what do? I clean my brush of water, okay? I have this bucket here, let me show you. I have this bucket. I clean it off the water with water, and then I dab it on the paper towel or a regular disgusting towel like the one I have here, and then I lift back. So this is essentially lifting and charging, but I call it real-time value control because you have to do both. So if I clean it more and then I lift more, it's gonna lighten up. But then if I messed up, I need to go back and add some more color to it. So nothing really is lost unless you went super duper dark. You can always correct your values when you work like this real time. You just have to be careful. Let me show it to you one more time. I'm gonna put a bit of a wash here, or let me show you the other way around. Let's say I pick up a lot of pure paint and I get this, and this is super dark. All I have to do is come back with a wet brush and then charge some water into it. And notice how it spreads it out. And if I want to lighten it more, I'll do the same once again. You see? And it lightens up. You have to learn how to do these things rather fast while working on your layer, okay? Now, sometimes I'll have a very small area that I need to fill in with light paint. So what I'll do is I'll grab a bit of thick paint, and then I'll just spread it out using water. So you see, I'm just spreading out the dark paint using water, and so it lightens. Okay, so that's another thing you want to explore. But you have to be able to, first off, you have to observe the value. But let's say you already know it's too light, you have to be able to go back and darken it. Now, at the heart of this technique is lifting again and charging. When you lift, you want to make sure that your brush is not too wet. You want it to be quite dry. So sometimes you really have to dry it enough, and then it will allow you to lift, okay? I didn't even dry it enough, and I have to clean it a little more. But now it will allow me to better lift, okay? And if you want to charge, you have to do the other way around. Because there's so much water on the paper, you have to come back with a very thick paint, more than you'd think, and then charge it in, okay? If I'd come with the same thick paint here, it would be, notice, it would be super dark. But here, because I have to negate the wetness, I have to overcompensate for it, okay? So that's real-time value control. With time, you'll learn how to better use that technique. Next up is blending edges. This is something I did a separate video on as well, but you have to master, and that is, so let's say I have this shape here, and I want the edge not to be so striking or stark that I clean the brush, and then I dry it on the paper towel. It's just damp, and then I go over the edge, and notice how it kind of blends it in. Now I have to do this several times, okay? And the drier the brush is, the less movement you'll have, okay? The less movement of water. If I come back with a very wet brush, notice how the paint really moves with me. And I don't want that to happen, so I have to dry it up. Let me show it to you once again. I'm gonna zoom out a bit. So let's say I have this maybe even darker bit of wash, okay? To lighten it up, basically what I'm doing is adding more water and moving the edge, okay? So I can do it slowly. I wet the brush, and then I dry some of that, and I go like this, and it goes a little lighter, and then a little lighter still, and finally the brush is super clean and almost dry. It's just a little damp, and then I blend that final edge. So that's one way to go. But if you want to do it fast, then you have to work fast in terms of the brush work. So here's the edge, and now to blend it, I wash the brush in water, I dry most of the water, and here we go, I blend that edge, okay? And now you get less of a harsh transition here. And this is really important because edges mean a lot in watercolor painting. It's a major part of, a variety of edges is important to achieve interest. Now sometimes the edge starts to dry, but you can still work on it. Let me show you how. I have my water bucket here. It's just too huge to be in the frame, sorry about that. So I wet the brush. Now, when I wipe it on the towel, I wipe it and I leave it a little more damp than usual. So I wipe maybe 1 to 3 times. Then I go over the edge and I start scrubbing it almost, okay? And then what happens is it starts reawakening, and I can come back with either a tissue and kind of blend it, or I can come back with an even drier brush, cleaned and dried, and then blend it a little more. So what this involves is reactivating the edge, like so. And sometimes it's easier to do, and then dabbing it. Sometimes it's easier to do with a bit of a more synthetic brush. Let me show you. So let's say this edge on the left, I'm gonna just wet it a little bit, you see? And then I'm gonna pick it up, and then I blended it just a bit. Let's look at the top edge as well. Do the same for that. So wet it a bit, and then come back and lift some of that, you see? So let me zoom out and conclude. So here are all 3 techniques I want you to practice on, especially if you feel like you're hitting that intermediate or advanced level. And that is, allowing the paints to mix on paper makes for a much more interesting painting, in my opinion. Again, this is stylistic choice. Some would argue they disagree with that. That's fine. That's my style. Then real-time value control, charging with more paint, lifting back the paint, and you have to be able to do it fast while gauging the value of your subject. And then finally, blending edges, which is one of the hardest technique in watercolor painting. By the way, you can do that between paints. So I can pick up a bit of red and then blend the edge between yellow. You see, I just let them blend. That's another form of blending, really. And then I can go to some blue and blend the edge with the blue because I'm using them while the edges are wet. But in any case, this is really one of the hardest techniques in watercolor painting. You can allow yourself some time to practice it. And you have to learn. It's different based on the paper you're using, based on the brush you're using, maybe even based on the paints you're using. So you have to allow yourself time to become familiar with your tools, and you will improve with that. And with that being said, let's wrap this video up. So this is it for this one. One last tip as promised. I want you to match the way you do this to your tools and your equipment, because this is going to look very differently if you're using different types of paper, hot press, cold press, different brands, pulp paper, brushes. Some are more synthetic, as I showed you, some are softer, and that really has a strong effect on blending, on charging, on everything. So my goal is to give you this suggestion, then you take it and apply it to your style and your tools and materials. I really hope you found this one helpful. If you have, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and also subscribe. I have tons of videos like this one, and I'm posting 3 a week, so you don't want to miss a thing. Thank you so much, and I will see you again in another vid real soon.